Lucky last session of the day. Mable's Head of Stakeholder and Government Relations, Liam Nilon, will take us through support at home regulatory changes in aged care and an NDIS registration update. Liam is a former political staffer who has worked in government relations for 9 years with experience across aged care, disability, health and financial services. He brings a deep understanding of parliamentary processes and regulatory affairs. Now, a fun fact about Liam, and this is borderline more on odd than fun as far as I'm concerned, but he does do a podcast about Australian history, and it's called The Dead Bunyip Society. So maybe we can put the link for that up later as well, but maybe we'll hear a bit more about that from Liam. So thanks again for being with us today. There's also going to be some Q&A opportunity at the end of this, so keep those questions and we'll pass them along to Liam as well. Thanks again.
I will say that I do have a slightly quiet voice, so I'm just going to pick up the mic and hold it, if that's all right by everyone. When people hear I have a podcast, sometimes people express an interest, but then I tell them it's about Australian history, and that seems to cure anyone's interest by my current listener figures. So if I do get a single listener from here, I'll be doing quite well. But no, that's a hobby of mine. Today we're going to be talking about two reforms. The first is called Support at Home. We're also going to briefly touch on NDIS registration. We're going to spend a lot more time talking about Support at Home, not because it's more important or anything like that, but just because we have a lot more information to share with you. I want to state at the outset of this session, there are some gaps in our knowledge because this is all really new. It's a dynamic environment. And so there may even be questions that you ask that we don't know the answers to. What I can commit to you today is that we will provide information to you as it becomes as we become aware of it, and we'll continue to keep you informed. This isn't the end of us talking about Support at Home. You'll be hearing a lot more about it from us. This is more kind of the beginning. I will say that there should be plenty of time for questions, assuming my timing that I've been doing in my bedroom has been accurate. But I'll just ask that you keep those to the end, and we'll take questions both online and in the room. I know some of you probably only work in either NDIS or aged care, but I've met a number of support workers over the years on the platform who've said to me, one time that they only have aged care clients or they only have NDIS clients, and the next time I run into them, they say, "Oh, Liam, I've started working with Sally and she's in the NDIS, and that's been a great experience." So even if this doesn't all seem relevant to you, I'd suggest maybe just listening in. There may very well be content that is of use to you. And there's also a lot of overlap between the sectors. So there's times when, even if you might not work in the sector, there's still some information of relevance. All right, so Support at Home is the new name for what we currently call aged care home care packages. You might hear us, because we love acronyms at Mable, you might hear us call this HCP. Off-platform, people sometimes call this aged care home care. What they're referring to will now all be part of Support at Home. There is another system that we don't participate in here at Mable, but if you do some work off platform, you might have some familiarity with it. It's called Commonwealth Home Supported Placements, or CHSP. Love those acronyms. And that is intended to also become part of Support at Home, but it's a staged implementation. So that will be a couple of years in the future. Probably 2027 is what the government has said. The goal of the changes to the Support at Home system is to increase the sustainability of aged care home care. The government's position, and this was a bipartisan matter, I should say, is that some older people can and should be making more contributions to the cost of their aged care, and we'll talk a bit more about that in the moment. One of the big changes, you'll sometimes hear when we talk about home care packages, we talk about levels, and they're called levels 1, 2, and 3, 4, which is very original. But under the new system, there will be more levels of support, and there'll be both lower levels below the current level 1, which is intended to eventually replace what I was telling you about before, CHSP, and there'll be at least one higher level above the current level 4, because there is something of a gap between level 4 and residential aged care. So that's a really good thing. So the way this will work in terms of implementation is that older people who currently have a home care package will have that existing level of support maintained. They'll just be moved over into the support at home system sometime over the next couple of months. First, we thought it was going to be 1 July. It's now being suggested to us it'll be sometime after 1 July, but the government will keep those older people informed about what is happening. Significantly, they will be subject to what is called grandfathering, which is a slightly insensitive term when we're working in aged care, but that's what government calls it. And that means that those who currently have a home care package will not be required to make contributions to begin with, and I'll explain contributions in a moment. One of the other big changes, so support at home is one piece of what we call the Aged Care Act that was passed in 2024. And the Aged Care Act actually did a bunch of things, and they made big changes to residential aged care, which obviously we're not involved in, but some of you might do some work in on the side. But one of the other big changes is that for the first time ever, Mable and other platform operators will be formally regulated under the Act. That might sound daunting to you. My guess is you won't notice any change in your day-to-day supports, because what is effectively being regulated is Mable will be required to do a lot of the things it already does. So for instance, we'll be required to have a complaints and incident management system, which we already have. But this is still a good thing, and I think it's an acknowledgement of the work that all of us here do, particularly yourselves as support workers, in that the government has sought to recognise and effectively legitimise this system. Now you might say to me, Liam, why wasn't Mable regulated already? And the answer to that is pretty simple. The last time we changed the Aged Care Act, it was 1997. I was in year 2, and no one had invented an aged care digital platform yet. So this is a slightly overdue, but really important change. The final thing I want to emphasise here is that Mable fees will not change as a result of support at home. So there'll be no increase to Mable fees. That's a decision we have made. The other thing, we're about to start talking about contributions, but just keep in your mind, this is something we're telling you for your information. You're not going to be required to collect contributions. You probably won't be involved in it directly at all, but there's a couple of reasons why we want you to be aware of those changes. All right. This is a slide with a lot of information, and one of my more digitally literate colleagues has helped me make it dynamic and interesting, so there you go. Unfortunately, they couldn't do anything to make me interesting, but here we go. So these are the 3 types of contribution categories. They are everyday living, independence, and clinical supports. Now, here are the types of services that fall into those categories, and I understand we will be sending these slides to people. Yep. Be sending the slides at the end, so don't feel like you can photograph if you want, but we will send you a copy. So in terms of what falls into each of those categories, if you see a version of this that the government has put out, and obviously I've just copied something from the government here, there are other services in this column called service type. I've just left off the ones that aren't on the Mable platform, just to make this a little bit more accessible. Now, the third column are how we describe things on Mable. And one of the things you might notice is, on Mable, we have a big category we just call social support and domestic assistance, and we kind of just threw everything into there, like a big stew pot. In hindsight, maybe that wasn't the best way to go about it, and we probably will change that at some point. But presently, within that category, there are 5 different types of supports. Social support, transport, domestic assistance, home maintenance and repairs, and meals that are all being provided on the Mable platform. Personal care is obviously personal care. That one's pretty self-explanatory, as are nursing and allied health. Now, the reason this matters is because the different levels have different contributions, and we'll talk about that now. So, like I said, client contributions are not something that you will be directly involved with. It is the responsibility of the registered provider to collect the client contributions. And a registered provider, now that's the same language you use in the NDIS, which is going to get confusing for all of us, but in this context, that's what we used to call an approved provider. So your client might be with Homemade, or they might be with Uniting Care, Anglicare as an approved provider. They'll now be called registered providers, which will be very confusing. These are the 3 categories of clients, and the level of contribution will be determined by category. Now, those calculations will be done by the government, so you won't necessarily have visibility of that, but there are kind of 2 reasons why we want you to be aware of this. The first is your client might have questions. They might come to you and say, Liam, if I was the support worker, I just don't understand all this. Why is this happening? Why is this changing? And of course, it will only change for them if their package increases. So if they're currently in the scheme, it won't change straight away. But if their level of package goes up, they might suddenly have contributions and they might suddenly have questions. The second reason is that the need to make contributions may affect what supports clients choose to purchase. And so that's something to be aware of. So, all categories of clients will not make any contributions in clinical care. So that is nursing and allied health on the Mable platform. They are exempt from client contributions. However, all categories of clients, from 5% for full pensioners up to 50% for self-funded retirees, will make some level of contribution for independents. So if you remember from the previous slide, that was social support, personal care, transport. They fall into the independence category. For everyday living, which is domestic assistance, home maintenance and repairs, meal prep, there are higher levels of contributions, and that starts at 17.5% for full pensioners and can go up to 80% for self-funded retirees. Now, looking at all of this, I have opinions, shall we say, and I'm sure many people have opinions, and I always encourage people, as someone who's been a lifelong participant in the political process, feel free to put forward those opinions to your local member, as is your right in a democracy. Unfortunately, these decisions have been made, and this isn't something that Mable's decided. This is a government policy, indeed a bipartisan one, though by all means do write to your local member about everything. Big believer in that. But unfortunately, this is the way it is at the moment. Okay, so what does all this mean for you? Like I said, client contributions, that'll be collected at arm's length from you by the registered provider, and you may not even have visibility of that. But there will be one significant change in terms of how invoices work. And our goal in all of this is to make sure you continue to get paid and so that you can continue to do your support work. The one change will be particularly for those who provide more than one type of support in a single shift. Now, there are support workers who just do one thing. And I don't mean that in a bad way, that's, each to their own. But most support workers do a little bit of everything. So, for example, you might go into a client's home, you might help them, you're a qualified personal care worker perhaps, you might help them shower and dress, and then you might do a bit of light cleaning, and then you might transport them to the shops. Well, that's 3 different categories of service with 3 different levels of client contribution. Well, 2 of them are the same, but one's in a different category. So, what do we need to do? Well, what Mable needs to do is actually completely change how our platform works, and we're doing that right now. And our goal is for, as much as possible, the platform to do that heavy lifting so that those categories we saw on the tables before are mapped, and that can happen without you necessarily having to be involved. But for some of you, we're going to need a little bit of help, and we're going to reach out to you when that time comes. It might be about agreements, it might be about processing an individual invoice, and when we're coming to you, I just want you to understand that's to make sure that the invoice doesn't get rejected and that you continue to get paid. But sometimes we just might need to do some manual adjustments, particularly in the early days when we're still trying to figure everything out. But we're hoping to minimize that as much as possible and for the platform to do the bulk of the heavy lifting. All right. Like I said, I will definitely answer questions at the end, so maybe jot them down as we go, and feel free to ask them when the time comes. Alrighty, so one of perhaps the biggest change you guys will notice is that people who work with support at home clients will have training obligations. We'll talk a bit about how all of this will work. Now, this is a requirement that applies to the registered provider, but because you guys as independent contractors will be supporting the client, that registered provider will be responsible for ensuring you're appropriately trained. The way this will kick in on the platform is, in a perfect world, maybe you would have had everything ready to go from July, but that's just not doable. And I don't think anyone in the sector is really going to be ready to go from July. We're in conversation with government about it. They know what we're planning. Our goal is to have this training start to become available by the end of this calendar year. And I literally told the Commission about that last week. This is an ongoing dialogue that we're having with them. And they haven't raised any concerns about that. The government's expectation is that we're all working towards compliance, not that everyone's trained on day one, because that would be pretty crazy. The training is going to be different depending on your qualification and the type of supports you provide. So someone who provides domestic assistance is obviously going to do quite different training to someone who is a nurse, they are, that is quite a different journey. So one of the things that we're working on is, what does that training journey look like for each individual person? Once again, if you do not work with supported home clients, that is aged care clients on the platform, if you only do NDIS clients or only private paying clients, this will not apply to you. And this will only be brought in for those who are currently working with people. For those that do work with aged care clients, you actually are already doing a piece of training. You may not even remember it. It kicked in I think, 2022 from memory. It was on the Serious Incident Response Scheme. My understanding is it took an average of 8 minutes, and that was just to briefly explain, one, the Serious Incident Response Scheme, sometimes called SIRS, was brought in for the first time after the Aged Care Royal Commission. That was just to explain to support workers what that meant. A lot of this training is going to look quite similar to that, just to give you a bit of an idea of what all of this looks like. Some of you do work off platform. Like some of you will do a little work with Uniting Care. I know a lot of people also do that in the NDIS, and that's perfectly fine. Where you do work off platform with a registered home care provider and you do their training program, our goal is to accept that. We don't want people having to do 2 sets of training. Now, I can't promise you you'll never have to do 2 sets of training, and here's why. Because sometimes people go and do some work at a residential care facility, and the resi care training will be different from the home care training. So we want to be this as broadly acceptable as possible, and also for the training you do on Mable to be accepted elsewhere. And we'll provide you with certificates so that you can pass this on. The goal is you don't have to do it more than once. I just can't promise that that will never happen, but that is absolutely our goal in bringing in this important change. All right, so here are the 6 areas of training. Now, if you would like to know more about them, these are taken from what are called the Aged Care Strengthened Standards. You can Google that. It's publicly available information. You have to scroll down a fair bit, maybe just Control F person-centered. I can't remember the number that it is within the standard. But this is what the government tells us an aged care worker needs to be trained in. So one thing you might notice about this, they don't list a bunch of courses. And maybe, I have opinions, as do we all. Maybe that'd be great if they did. But that's not how this works. Instead, they say, here are 6 areas an aged care worker must have knowledge in and must be able to demonstrate, which is a little bit vague. And so each person might have slightly different interpretations of what that means. So a big part of us designing our training program is actually bringing in all the registered providers that use our platform, there's 170 of them, and saying to them, what do you guys think this means? And working through it so that we can build a program that will be accepted by as many registered providers as possible. Some of this, like I said, is actually things you probably already have knowledge in. So if you are a registered nurse or a qualified personal carer, you have knowledge in responding to medical emergencies because you have either a first aid certificate, or if you're a registered nurse, you have ongoing CPR obligations, right? Similarly, requirements for COC, SIRS and quality standards, everyone who's with an aged care client has already done half of that on the Mable platform, that is, because you've already done the SIRS training. But we're going to have to add in some more information about the new quality standards, which are changing in July, so we can't even do that just yet, and about the aged care code of conduct was already covered, but the statement of rights is the other part that we'll need to add in there as well. So some of this you would have already covered. Other parts will be a bit like the session we just had, where it will be only, instead of about autism and anxiety, we'll have sessions about dementia. We already have a lot of that available through the Learning Hub, but we want to make this as accessible as possible. This will be predominantly online learning. Now, there may be exceptions for a small number of people who might need to, and this isn't true of people who do domestic assistance, and transport, but there might be a small number of people in personal care who've let their first aid certificate lapse who might need to go and do an update of that, and that is an in-person thing. But for most people, this will be online training. Nor will we send this to you and then say, you've got to have it done by next week. This will be, something that you are given access to, and then you're given a fair amount of time to work through so that you can become compliant. And then at the end of it, you'll receive certificates. So you can document this, so we can document it, and you can use this with other people as well. Okay, a lot of information, I know. Next item, we're changing how screening works. This is also due to the Aged Care Act. Now, all of you who have been approved to work on the Mable platform, which I'm assuming is everyone in the room and probably everyone online as well, you won't notice this change straight away. This is going to affect new people to begin with. But from July, instead of the current federal police check, we're going to substitute that for the NDIS worker screening check. All the other checks will still apply. So you still have to get the working with children check if you work with children, all that sort of stuff. We're just going to substitute one for the other. This is a requirement of the Aged Care Act, and but it's not a requirement that kicks in straight away. Everyone has been given some time to comply with it. The way this will work for existing SPs is, sorry, that's our internal terminology. The growth people are frowning at me. Existing independent support workers is that you'll be required to move over to the new check as your current check expires. So the federal police checks that we currently have, they last 3 years. So at the end of, say you've just gotten one, in 3 years' time, well, not quite 3 years because we'll give you a bit of notice in advance, but in almost 3 years' time, we'll contact you and say, hey, it's time to go and get that NDIS worker screening check. There are both upsides and downsides to this change. Like I said, this is a decision of government, and so we're required to do it, but I want to be upfront, there are both upsides and downsides. One of the upsides is NDIS worker screening checks last longer. They last for 5 years rather than 3, so you don't have to do it as often. They're also broadly acceptable. The goal of the federal government is for this one check to apply across all aged care providers and all NDIS providers. That is more complex than it might sound, so they're working towards that goal, but that is absolutely their goal. They want to make this a single check for all workers across the care economy. And I think that'd be a really good thing if and when that does happen. The downside is it is more expensive, and the expense depends on the state in which you live because it's set by the state government. So right now in New South Wales, it's $80. My understanding is it's actually about to increase. But right now in WA, it's $180. And the timing also is different. We can turn around those federal police checks fairly quickly. Sometimes these take a bit longer, so we're going to have to factor that into our planning to give you a bit of notice to make sure that you have time to get the check. Okay. A lot of you who are approved to work on the Mable platform may already have an NDIS worker screening check. And I say this, and that's a good thing. You might have it from a previous job. Often when people come to us on the platform, they say, but I've already got an NDIS worker screening check. What I will say to you is, you don't need to go out and do this now, but if you've already got the NDIS worker screening check, there's a way to voluntarily tell us, so it will go into our system. And that's one thing, if you haven't done it already, that would be really great. It would just make our life easier, and also your life easier, so we don't have to bother you in a couple of years' time. So if you just go into your profile, there's a section called NDIS worker screening check, just press yes, and you can input the information. And then that way, that'll go straight onto your profile already. When it comes time to get the check, the way you do that is you just go through to the NDIS Commission website. They will then refer you onto your state or territory website. It's slightly different for each state or territory because it's up to the state governments, but they will then talk you through the various steps. I believe in New South Wales, you actually have to go into Service New South Wales to do it, which is a bit annoying. But such is life, I guess. Otherwise, as I said, this will all kick in as your current check expires, and we'll let you know when that time comes. Okay, in summary, Mable will make some changes to our invoices to ensure that you get paid, but the platform will do most of the heavy lifting. For some people, there might be some manual adjustments that need to be made. Mable will continue to support you through its function as a digital labour platform operator. You're probably not going to notice any day-to-day difference, but I think it's a really good thing. If you work with support at home clients, you will have some training obligations, but that won't be available from July. We're aiming for December, but we will keep you informed. There'll be plenty of information made available about that. Do not think that you have to be an expert in support at home. There is literally, within our business, we've got about 5 lawyers. I'm not one of them, thankfully. You got me, and then you've got a bunch of really smart people. We're all working on this stuff to make sure that Mable is compliant. You need to be experts in what you're already experts in, which is support work. Our goal here is just to help to support you to continue to do the great work you're already doing. Okay, so I know that's a lot of info. We're going to briefly talk about NDIS. This is just one slide, and then I will do questions at the end. The reason I'm not giving you much information on this is actually because I don't have much information to give, unfortunately. But I just wanted to take this opportunity to talk about this briefly. So, presently within the NDIS, Mable is a non-registered provider. There are lots of reasons for this. Maybe come up to me afterwards and I can talk you through them if you're curious. But it is likely that's going to change sometime in the future. But I know there has been some confusion about this. There was an announcement by the government last year, and they said that all platforms would be required to register after July 2025. And a lot of people said, oh, from 1 July, everyone's going to have to register, which is a reasonable assumption because it was a strangely worded announcement. I was confused too. But the NDIS Commission has confirmed that is not what they meant. They are presently working through 2 proposals, but they haven't actually finished developing those proposals. So they've said they're going to write a report for government in June, and then they're going to, the government will need to make a decision. Obviously, we've just got a new NDIS minister, and no doubt she's got a lot on her plate to get across. Some point after that, if they were to go with this model in which they're proposing to only register platforms, they'd need to actually consult on what is called an instrument. There's probably more information than you need, but that would take some time. So even if they were to move ahead with this, we think this is some months down the track. Our preferred model is actually that they don't move ahead with this specific idea, because we support universal registration that is risk proportionate. We don't think that anyone should be singling out platforms. It doesn't make sense to us to single out, people that work on platforms, but not people that don't work on platforms, but provide the exact same supports, or people that work at a brick and mortar NDIS business and also do social support and personal care, which are the dominant supports on our platform. And that's an argument we're hoping the government will listen to. We've got a new NDIS minister, that's part of ongoing conversations. All I can say to you is this will not happen 1 July, so don't think, no need to panic that this will be a sudden change. There will be time and notice given if it does happen, and we will keep you informed. Like I said, right now, I don't necessarily have all the answers on this one, but my goal is to provide that information to you, and that will come via our newsletters. Of course, we're going to do webinar sessions on support at home. If this was to happen, we'd do webinars on that as well. There will be a lot of information forthcoming if and when that does happen.
Can we thank Liam? Massive round of applause.